Chapter 5. Tarhoon woke the next morn with the dawn, having gotten adequate but fitful sleep. His dreams had been filled with disturbing images. He exited his tent and made his way into the forest, bathing himself in a secluded section of the forest, making sure his scales were pristine. After he had cleaned himself, he made a prayer to Bahamut to begin his day, then returned to camp. He dressed himself simply in pants and tunic, and then found an open area in the encampment to begin shadow fencing to practice his moves. Despite the stressful day that yesterday had been, the morning was quite pleasant, with birds chirping in the trees and the occasional animal here or there. An hour or so later, Tarhoon saw Shirk emerge from his tent. Shirk's hair had been braided into a beautiful dwarven style, but Tarhoon refused to let himself be distracted, and continued to fight his imaginary opponent. As soon as Shirk was fully in the daylight, he stood up straight, yawned, and stretched his back. Shirk walked up to Tarhoon.
"Tarhoon, the rabbit speaks goblin,"
Shirk informed him. "Nice to know," Tarhoon replied, not looking at the bugbear.
"Yeah, he gave me these braids,"
Shirk added.
"We should check the trap."
He looked over to the gate. "So, Shirk, how did you braid those?" Elwood had arrived now, pointing to Shirk's braids.
"Oh, the rabbit. He speaks goblin,"
Shirk said nonchalantly.
"You want to go check the trap with me?"
"Wait, Shirk, you were speaking goblin to the rabbit," Elwood continued, ignoring Shirk's suggestion. "It speaks goblin. Why haven't you spoken about this? This should have been the first thing to discuss." Elwood seemed oddly fixated on the rabbit.
"I said it to Tarhoon. It was the first thing I said. I said good morning, then I said, 'Hey, Tarhoon, look, I have braids, because the rabbit can speak goblin, and it gave me braids.'"
As they continued to discuss the rabbit, Tarhoon returned to his tent and donned his padded chain armor. Whatever was out there, he would need to be ready for it. They made their way to the gate and exited, heading east for the trap. Shirk tried to wake Pip, but she refused to be roused. Tarhoon borrowed some writing materials and quickly scrawled a note, leaving it next to her sleeping body. "Were we attacked again?" Elwood asked the guard as they neared the front gate.
"No,"
the guard responded curtly.
"They didn't do anything?"
Shirk asked incredulously.
"Well, we weren't attacked, but we haven't exactly looked out there," the guard shrugged. "We hit rocks with picks."
They opened the gate, and Shirk inspected them to see if there were any newly formed gashes on them. As they left, they could see in the bright morning sun that something was in the trap. However, it looked more like a man than anything else. He was standing, facing away from the camp into the forest, not moving. As they made it there, the rest of the party began sneaking up behind the man. Soon they observed that this figure wore a cloak that was tattered, and Tarhoon noticed that one side of the cloak was noticeably flat. Suddenly, Tarhoon realized this man was missing an entire arm. Tarhoon would have none of the party's deception and decided to face the man directly. He circled the trap and looked him dead in the face. "Greetings. How have you come to be entrapped?" he asked. The man's eyes remained passively unfocused. His only defining feature was a large gash that crossed his face from his right temple, down across his eye, through his nose, and down to his left cheek. His eye was still there, but it was cloven in half. Tarhoon saw Shirk behind the man with the other members of his group, urging Tarhoon to keep talking. "Can you speak, sir?" Tarhoon asked. "Are you friend or foe?" the man asked simply. In a flash of memory, Tarhoon recalled that those were the same words that the undead they had fought before had spoken. Pip sent him a mental message telling him to befriend whatever was in the trap, but he brushed it aside. "Friend, if it's agreeable to you," Tarhoon replied, hoping to gain this strange man's favor. The fact that the man refused to move despite his leg being caught in a bear trap, and the man's blank-eyed stare were beginning to unnerve Tarhoon, and a deep fear began to manifest within the pit of his stomach. "Do you serve the king?" the man asked. His tone never wavered, but remained flat and single-toned for every word he spoke, apart from where it turned up to indicate a question. Tarhoon's mind returned to Jenkins' cabin and the conversation that happened there. "I serve the god Bahamut," Tarhoon replied. "You do not serve the king?" the man replied. "The king of the forest?" Tarhoon questioned, the pit in his stomach growing deeper. "Yes," the man responded. "I do not." Tarhoon did not believe in deception, so he refused to lie to this man. He showed no sign of it outwardly, but this man was giving him every indication of danger. Without warning, the man's remaining arm shot out, faster than Tarhoon could react, and latched itself onto the left side of Tarhoon's face, just over his eye. Tarhoon screamed as a searing pain fused itself into his skin, seeping deeper into the muscles. A deep weakness flooded through his body. Irony came into Tarhoon's mind alongside the pain. The very thing that had produced no problems when he had been worried about it yesterday was now searing necrotic damage into him when he felt it was safe. He rued that irony bitterly. Tarhoon found himself able to see from his left eye socket once more as the arm which had latched itself onto his face fell both from his face and the man it had come from. Shirk's blade had cleaved it off in its entirety. Tarhoon knelt to the ground and held his new injury in pain. The next moment, Elwood's short swords freed the man's head from his body. The head hit the ground and rolled, but the rest of the body remained standing. 2 arrows sprouted from the clearly undead corpse's body, loosed by Fee. The torso collapsed to the ground as they severed his spine.
"Someone grab the head," Shirk said. "We killed the thing." "We did it," he added happily.
Tarhoon gave a quick thanks to Bahamut and held his hands over his injury. As divine healing surged into the wound, it burned more fiercely than it should have, followed by a quick relief. Tarhoon touched the area gingerly and found that his scales had seared off where the hand had touched him, and had now scarred over due to the healing. He still winced as he touched it. "Tarhoon, are you all... Clearly you're not all right, but are you feeling a bit better now?" Elwood asked.
"Someone should grab the head,"
Shirk repeated, reaching for it. He jumped back when it gnashed its teeth, clearly still alive. "Hold on. We don't know if that will give us the same thing that Tarhoon just got," Elwood cautioned.
"There is a hood over there. We should be able to wrap it in the cloak."
"What if that's tainted too?" Elwood asked. Shirk began to speak a spell, but Tarhoon simply walked over and picked the head up with the hood of the cloak. He began to walk back to the camp with it, leaving the others to do with the body as they would. A moment later, he smelled smoke. Tarhoon assumed that was the smell of someone burning the body. He cursed himself for having not thought to perform the rites of cremation, but was in a foul enough mood not to care at the moment. They reached the mine camp, and at its entrance, Elwood spoke. "Do not reveal the surroundings to it yet. I recommend that we put it in an enclosed space that is dark and much more similar to an interrogation room," he told Tarhoon. Shirk grunted in agreement behind him. That way it cannot know our true strengths and true numbers.
It's a fair enough plan, Tarhoon concurred.
He began to walk toward the mine, but Elwood spoke again. We could just carry it into a tent and then interrogate it there. As long as we keep the doors relatively shut, it should be dark enough. Tarhoon ignored the protest and walked into the mine anyway. He noticed that this was similar to the stubbornness Shirk had shown in his effort to leave the camp beyond all reason, but he felt that since they captured it right outside the camp, if they opened it in a tent, it would know where they were. While he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was in the right, the similarity unnerved him. He heard the sound of at least one person following him before it stopped, and he heard Shirk say,
So, anyone else want to follow us?
After that, the footsteps resumed behind him, and a larger amount. Tarhoon felt certain they were following Shirk and not him, but he ignored the feeling and continued onward. His father would never have had to deal with these kinds of things. They entered the mine and were directed to a small, barely lit side room. Tarhoon placed the still-wrapped head on the ground and revealed the still disturbing blank-faced stare.
"Who is the king of the forest?"
Tarhoon demanded calmly. The others mostly stood in the shadows, but Tarhoon stood directly above the head, intending to face his enemy. Tarhoon felt a pressure in his mind, similar to the one he had felt the day before when Pip claimed to have heard the command to return. This time, words accompanied the feeling in his head as well. "Who are you?" the words said. The undead creature's eyes shifted for the first time in order to stare directly at Tarhoon.
"I am Tarhoon."
"What is it you seek?" Tarhoon spoke aloud. He could feel the others' confused eyes on him, but he was too focused to care much. "I seek to reclaim what is mine," the voice responded.
"Do you mean this land, or the Painite?" Tarhoon asked.
"My lands have been stolen from me." The voice was resolute.
"I will discuss this with you, but I need to know what you want," Tarhoon responded.
"I want my land back," the voice repeated.
"By what right do you claim this land?"
"It is mine."
"I need to know what right you have to it."
Tarhoon tried again. He felt the presence leave his mind. He looked up at the others. Suddenly Shirk spoke, followed by Elwood.
"I am Shirk. Pleased to meet you."
"It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance. My name is Elwood." Fee said nothing, but seemed nervous. The pressure reappeared in Tarhoon's mind. "I will grant you safe passage to meet with me, as long as you don't harm any more of my servants. Travel east into the valley. I reside in the ancient tower you will find there." The pressure in Tarhoon's head immediately ceased. He looked at the others, and he knew that they had heard the final messages as well. The only path forward seemed clear. Tarhoon wrapped up the head and placed it in the satchel at his side.
"Hey, where's Pip?"
Shirk asked suddenly. Tarhoon looked around the room. The bugbear was right.
"We left Pip in her tent earlier."
"Regardless, I suspect we should get going as quickly as possible," Tarhoon replied dismissively. "Yes, we save these people from the repeated afflictions as soon as possible," Elwood agreed. The four left the cavern and went straight for Pip's tent to pick her up. Inside, they saw no sign that she had even been there.
"You there! Do you know where the gnome went?" Shirk asked a nearby miner.
"Yeah, when she saw that you guys had left without her, she just kind of threw a tantrum and left. Didn't really say where she was going either. I don't think she's going to be back," the miner responded. Tarhoon saw Shirk duck into the tent again and pick something up from the floor. Coming out, he called,
"Foreman! If you see Pip anywhere, please tell her that we went to the valley to the northeast."
I don't think you're gonna come back alive, but I'll do that," the foreman responded. He seemed eager that the group leave as soon as possible, given the trouble they had caused. The 4 remaining party members packed up all their supplies and headed out the gate to the east, following the cliff wall of the mountain. As they walked, Tarhoon immediately noticed the forest was much quieter now, with birds being much more rare. They continued to walk until it was approaching sundown. "Look, there's a cave up there. I do believe that would be a good place to make our lodgings," Elwood pointed. The rest agreed. They entered the cave, and as Tarhoon was the only one of the party that didn't have the benefit of being able to see in the dark, the other 3 made sure it was safe and empty. They made camp with little fuss and were soon ready to bed for the night. As Tarhoon had finished rolling out his bedroll, he noticed Shirk looking between a symbol on the wall that Tarhoon had not noticed before and something in his hand. Tarhoon approached him and looked at the symbol, then down at the object that Shirk was holding. "What is that?" Tarhoon asked curiously.
"Huh? Oh, it's just a necklace that I found that Shirk left behind," Shirk told him.
Tarhoon thought back to the morning a few days ago when Pip had reported seeing something on the ground. It would seem that was this particular necklace. Tarhoon noted that the emblem on the necklace matched the now faded mark on the wall. The mark on the wall was larger, of course, almost like a mural. Able to make nothing of it, Tarhoon returned to the fire. They all discussed who would take watches, with Elwood taking the first, Fee taking the second, Shirk taking the third, and Tarhoon taking the final. With that settled, Elwood went to the cave's entrance to wait, and Tarhoon slid into his bedroll to sleep. The sun was already well into the sky when Tarhoon awoke. He knew instantly that something was wrong. Shirk should have woken him earlier than this. Elwood was rousing at the same time and noticed the problem as well. The pair woke Fee and broke camp as quickly as possible. Tarhoon, being sturdier than the other 2, opted to take Shirk's pack as well as his own. As he and Fee packed up the remainder of Shirk's things, Elwood climbed the tallest nearby tree in order to see if he could figure out where the kidnapper went. "There's a cabin several miles that way. I believe that may be where our good friend Shirk was taken," he yelled down to them. The group made for the cabin with as much speed as they could. Tarhoon and Fee ran along the ground, and Elwood jumped from branch to branch like a monkey, keeping up with them rather impressively. Soon, they reached a place where the trees broke into a small clearing between them and the cabin. Tarhoon took one step into the clearing and felt a snap of something painful catch him in the leg. He cried out in anger and pain as he looked down to see a bear trap ensnaring his appendage. Fortunately, his mail and scales had prevented it from doing any real damage, but they'd still dug into his flesh. He wrenched the bear trap free, feeling as though any moment could be Shirk's last. He needed to make it through as quickly as possible. He took another step and roared again as a second bear trap snapped through fallen leaves in the clearing to bleed his muscles. Tarhoon wrenched this one open as well and nearly cursed the glade and its traps. These had clearly been set here by the kidnapper himself. Tarhoon retreated out of the clearing. "I'm going to go on ahead and make sure that our bugbear friend is all right," Elwood suggested. Tarhoon nodded, and Elwood disappeared through the trees. Tarhoon began to run around the clearing, only to find his leg stuck in another trap. By this point, the pain was actually causing him to lose strength, and so, despite his better judgment, he stopped a moment to heal his injured legs. He ran around the clearing, encountering no more traps. As he got closer, he smelled the smoke of a wood fire and quickened his pace all the more. When he and Fee broke the tree line into the clearing where the actual cabin was, they were both stunned to discover Elwood and Shirk standing there in the clearing, watching a shed next to the cabin burn to ashes. The fire was roaring, but Tarhoon thought it fortunate the fools hadn't caught the forest on fire at least. In spite of that, he thanked Bahamut those two fools were still alive and well.
"This smells surprisingly good,"
Shirk noted, not having noticed Tarhoon and Fee. Don't breathe that in, Shirk. You don't want to know what's been in there," Elwood responded with disgust. Now that he mentioned it, Tarhoon could also detect the faint odor of burning meat through the smell of charred wood. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what was in there either.
"Oh, I know exactly what that is,"
Shirk replied, not caring in the slightest. "What's going on?" Fee asked.
"Oh, hey, you're here," Shirk cried. "I was kidnapped."
Shirk sounded strangely proud of the revelation. Tarhoon frowned, but said nothing. "What?" Fee asked, alarmed. "By a cannibal," Elwood added. "How terrible," Tarhoon said flatly. "My gosh!" Fee seemed much more worried about the situation than the rest of them.
"An actual cannibal."
Shirk sounded amazed. "Oh. Wait, what?" Fee asked. "He was also laying all the bear traps," Elwood continued. "Thank goodness you're still alive," Tarhoon said, with rather less emotion than he had intended to, but he felt adding something else would merely call attention to it.
"There were bear traps out there? I thought they were just in here. This guy has a ton of bear traps."
Shirk didn't seem to notice Tarhoon's lack of emotion, and Tarhoon felt relieved. "Oh, you have no idea," Elwood sighed. "We ran into many," Tarhoon said, eyeing the stack of metal bear traps sitting in the flames next to the burning shed. "There! It's the cannibal!" Elwood shouted, taking everyone off guard. Looking in the direction he was pointing, the group saw a man crouched near the tree line. He wore shabby clothes and had long beard.
"Oh!"
Shirk said, making a face.
"I'm gonna kill him."
As they watched, the man slid his fingers back to back through his hair and began pulling. To their horror, they found that he began splitting down the middle. Instead of gore, another half pulled itself from each side as though the man's center was a mirror. Fee cried out in terror, and rightfully so. "You will not divide us," the two halves said as they split even farther. At the conclusion of this horrific scene, two men stood at the clearing edge, each wielding one axe. The difference, however, is that the hair did not seem to come with the split, so each half of their head possessed half of the beard and half of the shoulder-length hair, while the other side was completely clean-shaven. "Clearly this abomination has infernal implications," Tarhoon said, eyeing the pair warily. "We must destroy it, quickly!"
"You know what?"
Shirk cried out.
"Your house is stupid! And I burned your shed to the ground, you goblin lover!"
Fee gasped. The right-haired cannibal clutched at his chest with his free hand and hung his head. He looked at the group with hate and sadness.
"How did you know?"
he cried in outrage. He gripped the axe in his teeth and began charging on all fours at the group. Tarhoon decided to take this challenge and charged directly at the approaching cannibal. As soon as he got within range, he swung his sword mightily at the enemy, but it scuttled sideways out of the way. The other cannibal ran for Tarhoon as well, and Tarhoon barely had enough time to bring up his shield before an axe slashed into the spot where his head would have been. A flaming arrow shot over the crouching cannibal's shoulder, and the next moment, Shirk, wielding an axe that Tarhoon hadn't seen him with before, carved a bloody swipe into the same man's left cheek.
"That's for kidnapping me!"
Shirk yelled. That particular cannibal, having been frightened by Shirk's earlier insult, ran past the pair and headed for the cabin, moving too quickly for either Tarhoon or Shirk's subsequent attempts to hit him. Tarhoon left the remaining cannibal for Shirk to deal with and chased after the one that had run off. It was heading for the burning shed. And Fee. Tarhoon couldn't see Elwood anywhere, but there was no time to think about that now. "I am your enemy!" he shouted, clutching a holy pendant that he always wore. Holy power flowed through him as his challenge supernaturally moved toward his opponent. The cannibal refused to be swayed. Tarhoon realized that Shirk had been left alone behind him and swung his blade backward toward the right-bearded cannibal. The quick creature ducked under it and slid out of the way. Fortunately, he dodged directly into Fee's attack, and the Morning Star bashed into him. The spiked club took it in the left shoulder, the prongs piercing deep into his flesh. The cannibal yowled and glared at the high elf. "Don't attack me!" Fee yelled in a mixture of fear and menace. The cannibal ignored the threat and, grabbing his axe from his teeth, sliced a gash across Fee's stomach. Not deep, but still enough to hurt. Tarhoon swung his blade with calm confidence and bit it deep into the cannibal's right side, breaking a rib or two in the process. The cannibal hit the ground with such force that an old tree near the clearing toppled from the power. This gave Tarhoon time to glance over and see how Shirk was doing from where Tarhoon had left him. Elwood had reappeared and had his blade stuck into the other cannibal's side, but this had given the cannibal the chance to swing his axe and cut Elwood across the chest. Elwood grunted, but Tarhoon needed to return his attention to his own battle. Fee tried to swing her Morning Star again, but the enemy parried it with his axe and knocked the Morning Star away. Shirk yelled something encouraging to Elwood, and the cannibal in front of Tarhoon swung his axe mightily. Tarhoon was too slow to block this one. The axe smashed into Tarhoon's arm, and it was a blow that Tarhoon was sure would bruise later. Tarhoon grunted with the pain of the blow, and dealt it all back to the cannibal with a smashing blow to the man's upper arm. Fee swung her Morning Star and, with a crunch, broke the cannibal's other arm in front of her. The cannibal was getting desperate, so he made a feeble attempt to push her into the fire, but his blood loss was clearly getting to him. Tarhoon took one final swing, and the cannibal's head toppled from his body, rolling across the ground and into the flames. Tarhoon watched it go, still holding his bloody sword. Then he remembered the other two and spun to join them. Shirk was swinging his axe and cut a scar across the left-bearded cannibal's leg.
"These two fought with the insanity of berserkers," Tarhoon noted.
The other cannibal was making his way away from the fight. He drew a dagger as he backed off, which sliced Shirk's shoulder as it passed. Tarhoon glanced at Fee from the corner of his eye. She had picked up her bow and nocked an arrow. She breathed out slowly and let fly. The cannibal glanced at Fee just as the arrow left her bow, and the arrow drove itself through the man's eye and embedded itself into his brain. Shirk stretched above the newly downed foe.
"Well, that was fun. Let's do that more often," he said. "Too bad our friends weren't here to see it." Sigh.
Shirk bent to search the body for anything valuable. While Tarhoon didn't approve of looting the dead, there was no one else around to take the remains, and they may as well have forfeited their rights to their belongings when they attacked innocent travelers. Tarhoon knelt to the ground and began to pray a prayer of thanks for their success in the battle. As he stood, he saw Shirk ripping a tooth from the man's body. He pocketed it. Elwood, meanwhile, held up the left-sided cannibal's hand and withdrew a knife. He noticed Tarhoon's questioning look. "We need a proof of the kill. There is a bounty," Elwood replied.
"There might be a bounty on this guy, yeah,"
Shirk agreed.
"He's quite literally a—"
Elwood cut him off. "We need sufficient proof, so we can bring his hand." Tarhoon cocked an eyebrow, shook his head, and bent down to search the body for anything identifying on the man's clothes. He found a pendant around the neck of the man that Fee had killed that simply said, "I am Shia." "That's all we need," Elwood said, dropping the hand and sheathing his knife. He lifted the body and carried it to the flaming shed. Throwing it in, he allowed the body to burn poetically in the ashes of his own works. The clothes, however, were in the pile beside. Between the two bodies, they found one pant, one pair of boots, a single sock, and a total of 17 gold.
"Who among us has more gold than the others?" Tarhoon asked. "I should probably take the gold," Shirk replied, reaching for the coins.
Tarhoon slapped the hand away.
"I have 3 gold pieces,"
Fee said, sounding embarrassed.
"How much gold do you have, Shirk?"
Tarhoon asked.
130,
Shirk said with certainty. "And Elwood, how much gold do you have?" Elwood reached into the sack that held his money for a moment and took a while to count them.
"I have 13 gold pieces, 95 silver pieces, and 94 copper pieces," he finally said.
"As Shirk and I have more gold than the two of you, we should divide the gold evenly between the rest." "Yeah, that's a good idea,"
Shirk relented. "With the greater portion going to Fee, since she has the lesser amount."
"I can agree with that," Elwood nodded. "Thanks, guys," Fee said shyly.
"To make it easy, we'll say 5 for Elwood and 12 for Fee," Tarhoon decided. "That should bring you up to relatively similar amounts." "I have a question. Is that Bahamut's thing communism?" Shirk asked Tarhoon with a smile.
"Tarhoon is the champion of the downtrodden and those who cannot fight for themselves," Tarhoon responded sternly.
"Well, all right then,"
Shirk responded dismissively.
"I would like to learn more about this Bahamut, since he got me more gold," Fee said.
Shirk took a chef's knife that no one had noticed nearby, and Shirk and Fee also decided to take a bear trap each, in case they ended up being useful.
"What if we made a bear trapapult?" Elwood mused.
"If we have a catapult, we should be throwing things besides bear traps,"
Shirk replied with a chuckle.
"They'll snap in the middle of the air."
"You can't prove that." Tarhoon arched an eyebrow. Shirk, not to be outdone, picked up a bear trap, locked it, and chucked it into the air. It hit the ground and snapped shut, carving into the ground. Shirk looked a bit sheepish. Tarhoon decided these bear traps could be useful, and decided to latch 2 of them to dangle behind his pack. Closed, of course. As they moved to throw the other corpse into the pyre, Tarhoon noticed a pendant around the other Shia's neck. He knelt to examine it.
"This is remarkably similar to the one we found on the wall," he muttered.
"This is the same pendant that Pip had, and it is the same insignia that we found on the cave wall," he said more loudly to the others, picking it up.
"This probably has a lot to do with a lot of stuff, but I'm not gonna pretend I know anything," Shirk replied.
"I will take the pendant if no one else wishes to," Tarhoon offered.
"You may take the pendant,"
Fee replied. Tarhoon slipped it around his neck and let it hang next to his symbol of Bahamut. Elwood had a sudden realization and pulled out the sock the cannibal had. He began to shave and attach the cannibal's beard to the sock, making it into a little puppet. Tarhoon didn't judge El, as Elwood was from another land, but still, the man was eccentric. They also found a deed to the cabin. They found a note that said, "Gotta find a way to keep the taxmen at bay." Then beneath, "Oh, so much death." Elwood took the deed. The group decided to investigate the cabin for anything useful, while Tarhoon used his frigid breath to put out the fire of the shed to make sure it didn't catch anything else. It was mid-morning when Tarhoon finally spoke up. "At this point, I feel we are becoming extremely distracted. We should press on to the tower," he told them sternly. The others agreed, and they left the clearing.